An emergency meeting is underway at the United Nations over the Israel-Hamas war. The Security Council was convened after an Israel strike on a Gaza school this past weekend. Hamas officials say at least 80 Palestinians were killed. Israel claims it was targeting a Hamas command center. CBC's Chris Reyes is at the United Nations for us in New York tonight. Chris, what are you hearing coming out of this meeting?
You know, JP, let's start with this context. There have been some 28 meetings called at the Security Council since October 7th. Remember, this is the most powerful arm of the United Nations. And I think the tone of this latest meeting is one of desperation and frustration that they have not been able to stop this war in Gaza and to prevent mass casualties and suffering among the Palestinian people and the hostages being held in Gaza. Algeria called this meeting, and its ambassador said at that meeting today that they contest Israel's account that the recent attacks over the weekend on a school was targeting Hamas militants. They insisted that this was a school that was sheltering civilians, including women and children. Algeria is not only a member of the Security Council, but also a member of the Arab group. And this gives you a sense, JP, of the divides in the Council, because we got a very different statement from the U.S. ambassador. Have a listen to what Linda Thomas-Greenfield had to say.
The United States is deeply concerned about reports of civilian casualties following the August 10th strike by the IDF on the compound in Gaza that included a school and a mosque sheltering desperate, displaced people, including women and children. Israel has a right to pursue Hamas. Israel has a right to respond to threats, but how it does that matters.
And JP, this meeting is a briefing, which means it's not a vote. There won't be an outcome. But even with outcomes, it doesn't necessarily mean there's action. For example, the Council recently passed a resolution to adopt President Biden's peace plan for Gaza that he announced back in May. That has remained a toothless statement, because the truth of the matter is that this Council really can't force anything upon the two parties that really matter in these negotiations, which would be Israel and Hamas.
And Chris, there is a renewed push this week to secure a ceasefire, but it's already looking like a deal could be out of reach. What's the latest on that front?
That's right. So while this meeting at the Security Council was happening, the New York Times reported that a Hamas representative in an interview in Lebanon said that Hamas will not be attending the ceasefire talks that were scheduled for later this week on Thursday in Doha, Qatar. That meeting was called on by Israel, by the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar in a strongly worded joint statement that was issued last week. And this might give us some insight why there were reports earlier this morning that Secretary of State Antony Blinken was supposed to be heading to the region, and then later reports claimed that he was postponing that trip. When the State Department spokesperson was pressed for details, he was quite tight-lipped about the Secretary's schedule and would only say this. Have a listen to what he said.
The Secretary is laserly focused and engaged on the region through calls with his counterparts, through calls with other leaders. He has been working the phones for the past number of weeks, continuing to echo the same message, which is we are close to getting this ceasefire deal across the finish line. It is vital for the release of the remaining hostages, including American citizens. It is vital for a surge in humanitarian assistance, which we believe will help alleviate the suffering that we're seeing in Gaza. And it is vital to help get this region out of this endless cycle of violence.
And, you know, JP, often the State Department is quite public about the Secretary's schedule. What that statement tells me is that these meetings that are happening behind closed doors are tightly guarded, that they're quite fluid, and they're not announcing anything until they have something concrete. And the big question now is, with Hamas reportedly pulling out of these ceasefire talks this Thursday, will that meeting continue? We're still waiting for answers and for comments on the different parties involved to get more of a conclusion on that.
All right, thanks so much. The CBC's Chris Reyes at the United Nations for us tonight. With